Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. There's some people who it just doesn't pay to give them your energy or to waste time talking about them, but there are other people who are just like hemorrhoids. If you try to ignore them, it won't be long before they become an absolutely intolerable pain in the behind. I had seen Barry Weiss on Bill Maher's little sideshow, and I at first thought, I'm not going to say anything about it because she doesn't deserve our time or our energy, but she was trending on Twitter. I know a lot of you guys probably saw it, so I think I need to at least say something. Now, I had heard of this woman a few years back. She was just another of those asinine Ben Shapiro, Milo Snuffleupagus clones. She'd write some crazy crap devoid of facts or even an interesting take. Barry Weiss didn't really actually come to anyone's real notice until she got herself hired at the New York Times by a fellow right-of-center individual. It was part of the paper's effort to bring in conservative voices. In the case of Barry Weiss, I'll bet you they wish they hadn't. Now, Bari Weiss, for those of you who don't know, she's a middling writer of average skill and intelligence. If you ever had the misfortune of reading any of her brain fart scribblings, it would become excruciatingly apparent she didn't get hired based on her writing ability. She got hired because of the old boy network. I'm no fan of Thomas Friedman, but at least when he writes, he gives the occasional witty turn of phrase in spite of himself. David Brooks is the resident apologist for all the right wing's bigotry, but at least he tries to deliver a profound sentence once every 10 years. My point is that even if I disagree or even oppose this or that pundit or writer, I'm still able to evaluate their writing as an exercise in style, if nothing else, basically as a creative writing piece published in a newspaper. But even with that admittedly low standard, Bari Weiss is neither witty nor profound. She's basically an angry woman who's mad that the New York Times didn't immediately fall at her feet, followed by the entire island of Manhattan. She is the quintessential example of the spoiled, self-entitled, bratty millennial snowflake, which is precisely what she claims not to be. It's very easy to dismiss Bari Weiss as a millennial douchebag with her head up her behind because, well, she's a millennial douchebag with her head up her behind. And just for the record, I'm sure she's as much an embarrassment to the millennials as she is to humanity. Now, Bari Weiss called wokeism a creation of the under 40 crowd. This moron doesn't even know that it was Gen Xers who created that term and popularized it. As with so many things, there are these white people who lag so far behind black culture they aren't even qualified to insult it or denigrate it because they don't know what happened, when, or who even did it. When you have some person who is attacking their own generation on the grounds that their generation isn't traditional enough, that's someone who's auditioning for a job from the elder set. Simply put, Bari Weiss is an economic and political harlot. She'll prostitute herself to whomever will pay for her asinine scribblings. Her pathetic gripe with the New York Times wasn't about who got published or who in the newsroom didn't kiss her behind sweetly enough. Her problem was she realized that she had gone as far as her feeble lack of talent would take her there. So she did resign from the New York Times, but I think it's even money that she understood that she better jump instead of waiting to get pushed. And of course, because she's Bari Weiss, she couldn't just leave gracefully and leave it at that. Instead, she predictably lashed out with this whining, meandering, self-pitying rant where she pretended to be persecuted even though she hadn't said anything in the prior 3 years. On a side note, failed presidential candidate Andrew Yang is a big fan of Bari Weiss. When she resigned, he tweeted, "If someone like Bari Weiss feels like she can't do her best work at the New York Times, they should make some real changes over there." All you Andrew Yang fans, where you at? Probably hiding somewhere with all those Biden fans. Now, every writer, especially where the white media is concerned, knows that a big part of making a career out of being a writer is identifying who or whom will pay you big money. With the implosion of the Trump re-election campaign and the resulting white rage that followed, there's been a number of right-wing nuts who feel like there's a lot of stupid money floating around out there, and this is a great opportunity to monetize some of that anger. But there's nothing new about this. Some simpletons actually believe that Ben Shapiro left Breitbart because of some ideological disagreement. You're an inbred moron, or perhaps a longtime Breitbart reader, which is the same thing, if you think that. Shapiro is a white supremacist through and through, and just like the ideology he espouses, he has no core principles. He just thought he saw a chance to slice off some of that angry white money that Steve Bannon and the boys were getting and hang out his own shingle, as the lawyers say. Ben Shapiro's exodus from Breitbart was motivated solely by personal financial gain and nothing else. Bari Weiss is operating out of the same playbook. She saw that the New York Times, arguably the most prestigious publication in the United States, showed her that she wasn't worth much there. Now, as far as newspapers goes, it doesn't get any more prestigious than the New York Times, and Bari Weiss realized that she had already topped out early. So, as with so many other ideologues in this country, Bari Weiss decided to switch up her style. What that means is she just intensified her own regular anti-black race baiting, and now she would see if she could get paid by the white right. Maybe they would give her the kind of paychecks that the New York Times wouldn't. As I've explained, this is not new. It's been going on as long as these white supremacists have been jockeying for position. Take Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, for example. He had previously been a conservative before he realized he couldn't make a niche for himself in that arena, so he made the switch to being a leftist, and that's become his ticket to ride. Same went for the late Ed Schultz. He was a conservative before he found out that there was a liberal outlet willing to pay him more. Joe Scarborough was a Republican congressman, part of Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution of 1994, though you sure couldn't tell by listening to him these days. Alison Camerata of CNN was on Fox before she switched networks, but perhaps the most significant political defection of convenience was Donald Trump. Trump was a run-of-the-mill Democratic donor and supporter for decades. A typical New York Democrat. But when he wanted to become president, he knew the Democrats wouldn't make room for him. The field was too crowded over there. So he went to the Republican side and out-crazied the crazies. It's all a finesse, family. That's what I'm trying to tell you. They identify whatever ideological camp they think will pay the most, and then do their best to jump out in front of it and convince everyone that they're the leader of the parade. And the particular parade that Bari Weiss is attempting to nominate herself as the band major for is the anti-woke, which of course means anti-black parade. All she does is whine and complain about protests against police brutality and anything involving black people. Apparently, America hasn't given enough opportunities to white folks, don't you know? I guess Bari Weiss conveniently forgot that she chose to resign from the New York Times, the most prestigious newspaper in America. Nobody stopped her from getting hired there. She got hired there because she's a white woman with white contacts in a white publication. Whiteness got her her job. It dang sure wasn't her skill. Oh, but she's terrified that there's all of these very well-qualified white writers and producers and creative types in the media who are being denied jobs just because. Now, this woman is a graduate from Columbia University. Oh, and did I mention she used to work at the New York Times? She didn't get fired from the Times, though I'm sure she would have eventually. Instead, she chose to resign, and yet she runs around now full-time bitching and complaining that apparently the white folks just can't catch a break. They just can't get a fair shake in this country. Now, as part of her Don Quixote-type war against wokeness, Bari Weiss has an account on Substack. I'm not entirely sure what Substack is, because I don't follow it like that, but regardless, on her little Substack account, she recently posted an online article, which I'm not sure if it was written by her or not, but it's under her account, and apparently there's been a lot of folks online on the white right who have been saying that Bari Weiss is the voice they need. Basically, they're treating her like the white media treated Lena Dunham. Here this woman is basically saying that white people can't get a fair shake, and that's what they're clapping like trained seals over. Name of her little article that was posted on her Substack, Hollywood's New Rules. It starts off with a lie right off the bat. The old boys club is dead. Really? You take a look at who the executives are, you take a look at who the media moguls are, you take a look at where the money is in Hollywood. What old boys club is dead? The people who have been calling the shots all along are still calling the shots, but that's part of how white supremacy operates. Maintain its advantage by denying that it has the advantage. That tactic is as old as white supremacy itself. I'll spare you the excruciating details, but long story short, this is a piece of propaganda crap that's basically saying that there's open discrimination against white males in particular in Hollywood. Oh, won't someone think of the white males? I mean, I can't even think of any white men who run anything in Hollywood. I can't think of any white writers who are working or any white directors. Well, except for 90% of them, that is. But this article is pure garbage. What it's basically saying is that there's been too many opportunities given, especially to black people, and the white folks have been shut. The white males in particular, it's specific about white men. White males in particular have been shut out of Hollywood. They provide absolutely no evidence whatsoever of this. But take their word for it, it totally happened. After all, they posted it on the internet, and if it's on the internet, that means it must be true. But while Barry Weiss's Substack is busy spreading misinformation and outright lies about the balance of diversity in Hollywood, one of the things that I thought was very interesting was they singled out Agent DuVernay by name specifically as part of the problem. As Barry Weiss's post says, to help producers meet the new standards, the filmmaker, Ava DuVernay, who was recently added to Forbes' list of the most powerful women in entertainment along with Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift, last year created Array Crew, a database of women, people of color, and others from underrepresented groups who work on day-to-day production. This post goes on to say that more than 900 productions, including Yellowstone and Mayor of Easttown, have used Array Crew. Privately, directors and writers voiced irritation with DuVernay, who they said had exploited the post-George Floyd moment. Jesus, I cannot believe... Oh God, my stomach is turning already. I am not about to let these mental midgets on the far right put me in a position where I actually have to defend Agent DuVernay, because that ain't going to happen. But I do think that it needs to be said. As you guys know, I've followed Agent DuVernay's exploits and exploitation for a while now. And as far as that whole Array thing goes, that goes back at least a decade minimum. Agent DuVernay has long been trying to figure out ways to make herself a power broker in Hollywood. She's long been trying to figure out basically how to get as many people beholden to her as possible. She's been playing the loyalty game. That's how she wound up being good friends, I guess you call it, with Ryan Coogler, among many others. That's what she's been doing. She's been doing her networking thing, scratch my back, I scratch yours. We try, be part of my group and things will happen. She's been doing that for a while. It didn't just happen in the last year or so. So that's the first problem. Second problem happens to be to put George Floyd's name in there. Oh yeah, they just have to shoehorn that in there somewhere because that's the talking point they actually wanted to reach. It isn't about Agent DuVernay at all. It's a matter of we got to find a way to bring George Floyd into this. We got to find a way to bring his name into this because, well, if there's anything that even resembles a racial reckoning in America, we got to make sure everybody understands this is undesirable and has to be stopped. The root of the problem is that whole George Floyd thing. We're going to oppose it by telling everyone we don't oppose it. We just oppose everything that people have done afterwards. We just oppose any changes that might have happened afterwards. We don't oppose we're not defending the murder of George Floyd. We're not denying that there's racism. We just don't want anyone doing anything about it. We just don't think that just because George Floyd opened people's eyes to the brutality of anti-black racism in America, that doesn't mean that anything's supposed to change. So there you have it. This is the reason why this little, I don't know what the hell to call this brain fart that was posted on Barry Weiss's Substack. It started making the rounds because as far as they were concerned, this hits all the talking points that we need. Yeah, these niggers, after that George Floyd incident, well, a lot of people started thinking that there need to be some changes throughout the society and we need to push back and let them know that that's just a problem. You guys need to start ignoring that. That's what this is meant to get across. And there was also a lot of individuals, apparently screenwriters and some other Hollywood types, many of which made their quotes anonymously, saying, I'm terrified of what will happen if anyone knows what I'm saying. Give me a break. But that's what's going on here with this piece. Apparently, Barry Weiss was able to have the intended effect, which was she got a bunch of people who would ordinarily wouldn't even spit at her if her face was on fire. They were willing to at least make some contributions to her little article, I guess. All to say that if you're a white male in Hollywood, you're just not getting enough work because you're white. Yeah, it's not because of your lack of talent or the fact that the old boy network basically has run out of its ability to manufacture money for you. All of those artificial opportunities to prop up the old boy network, they pretty much come to an end. That's not the problem. The problem has to be you're being robbed of something. By who? All those black people. Well, the studio executives are white. The directors are white. The shareholders are white. The boards of these companies are white. So who's robbing you? The black people are. This is particularly important, mainly because you got a bunch of right-wing nuts who are trying to figure out how do we start getting our own little media ventures off the ground. We got to start making movies and such. We got to start finding a way to influence the culture. And that being the case, that's why they think that Hollywood is a place that definitely needs to be targeted. But before you can target Hollywood, you got to first get the propaganda out there that Hollywood needs to make sure they let you in, whether you're qualified or not, whether you actually have an interest or not. Hollywood needs to let you in regardless. This is why Barry Weiss is on people's radars right now, mainly because of the fact that she was able to put out this piece that apparently had some quotes, a number of quotes from some people working in Hollywood, some screenwriters and such. But the funny thing to me is they actually are trying to criticize Agent DuVernay because some of these people from Array Crew were working on Yellowstone. Yellowstone was created by a white man, Taylor Sheridan, stars a white man, Kevin Costner. 90% of the cast is white. For God's sake, the people who greenlit it are white. Everybody involved with this white. And what are they saying? There's not enough white people involved. Not hard to read between the lines and see what the real message is, now is it? But if I were Agent DuVernay, I'd be spending a little bit more time looking over my shoulder these days because the white media's clearly got her in their sights. You'd think that Barry Weiss posted this simply because she's some right-wing nut reject from the New York Times? No, they wanted to make it very clear that Hollywood's going to pretend to play along with that whole we're so leftist, we're so liberal lie. They're going to pretend to play along with it. And that way they will be the leftist liberals who say, oh, we just can't go along with this woke stuff anymore. You know, for a little while there, we had like only one a black person on our set. Now there's two. And oh my God, it's just going to, we just let too many. We can't go along with it anymore. It's just too much. We can't do it anymore. We tried, but we just can't do it anymore. That's the narrative that they're trying to set up. And that's who was giving quotes for Barry Weiss's little hit piece. Some of these alleged white liberals, white leftists, etc. Now, let's see how many of Agent DuVernay's good white liberal pals in Tinseltown come to her defense. Because I think it's safe to say that this is just the thin end of the wedge, and these attacks are going to intensify. The same trash who are behind Time's Up are also the same ones who are trying to give oxygen and space to Barry Weiss. As they see it, this would-be racial uprising got away from them, like a bronco bull that threw them off its back. Black people forced changes on the society in a number of places, and they want to stop that before it goes any farther and reverse all that. They want to roll all that back. For a while, it wasn't safe to try to get back in the saddle, but now the white supremacists think that just enough time has passed. The street protests have died down, and now it's time to start rolling back and dismantling the changes that black people had forced on the system. But they have to do it slowly, and that means getting someone else to break the ice for them, to give them an opening. Enter the dim-witted Lena Dunham wannabe Barry Weiss. We have white supremacists like Barry Weiss whining about Twitter tweets, but predictably saying absolutely nothing about the Republican racists who are passing laws to encourage people to hit protesters who are simply saying that the police ought to be held accountable for their crimes. So-called wokeism is nothing compared to the burgeoning Nazism that is rising from the right. This is one of white supremacy's favorite tactics, the false equivalence. That line of reasoning, such as it is, was exactly what they used to justify slavery. Why, a white man beating you with a whip, that's no different than living in a mud hut in Africa, even though the mud hut part wasn't true. People went for it anyway because it justified what they already believed, which was the entire point. False equivalence is where made-up offenses like reverse racism come from. False equivalence is how Fox News and the right-wing hate machine try to compare a white supremacist mob attacking the Capitol to young people protesting the unpunished violence carried out by the police. False equivalence is comparing racists setting firebombs that kill 4 black girls in a church to young people who knock over statues of slave owners. The white supremacist goal is to reduce the definition of racism to something that they can claim they're not the only ones it applies to, even though they are the only ones it applies to. When white supremacy is on the hot seat, they don't try to defend their savagery. Instead, they try to claim that everyone's as bad as they are. This can only happen in a society where the media and the pundit class are already predisposed to go along with the white supremacist line. Barry Weiss's rantings are ahistorical, intellectually dishonest, festering with selective outrage and contradictions. In other words, typical white supremacist bloviating. Before her whining about Hollywood, she was trying to make herself into some sort of pseudo-academic commentator, talking about how right-wing thinkers and such, there's so much woke on these college campuses. Anyone who says anything that's to the right of Marx is going to get immediately fired. Give me a break. There are plenty of black teachers, professors, and administrators who have been fired, denied tenure, racially harassed simply for teaching basic history and common sense. Cornel West, the internationally known academic, was denied tenure by Harvard University. Bari Weiss whined and complained that Harvard was stifling free speech, but Cornel West's continued degradation by Harvard never came up in her narrative. I guess it just didn't fit. Harvard is a bastion of wokeism, she says. Yeah, so much so that one of the patron saints of the New Left has been repeatedly denied tenure there. That's how much that Harvard loves wokeism. They adore wokeism. Why, you gotta be woke in order to get any respect on Harvard campus. That is, unless you're woke. Bari Weiss, like all the other white supremacist propagandists out there, carefully cherry picks who her victims of Harvard's biases are. And of course, they're all white, they're all way right of center, and they all have something to do with saying or doing something against black people. Bari Weiss's thinly veiled racism fools no one, though someone should tell this unthinking clod that if she's trying to win right-wing nut moron of the year, she's up against some pretty stiff competition. Christopher Rufo and Ron DeSantis have a huge lead right now. I would say that Bari Weiss needs to think of something clever if she's going to get as much attention as those two nimrods, but thinking isn't Bari Weiss's strong suit, and neither is honesty. In her racist world, free thought is only limited to questioning black people's intelligence, making anti-black racist remarks, and defending any and all expressions of white supremacy. Because Bari Weiss's anti-black racism doesn't stop with lies about white guys being discriminated against in Hollywood. She also brings the exact same nonsense to the study of history. Like the rest of the clown car of conservatives, Bari Weiss has also jumped on the critical race theory bandwagon, desperately trying to see if there's any more mileage she can squeeze out of it for herself. The United States wasn't founded on slavery, she would tell you, even though most of the founders owned slaves, and not just one or two, but thousands. And the Constitution that they wrote enshrined into law the idea of black people being only 3/5 human. These are the nation's founding documents. But Bari Weiss claims the country wasn't based on that. The New York Times will never be intellectually honest, not in my eyes. But I think I am starting to see why Bari Weiss didn't last long there. They heard or read some of the crap she spouts and they thought, man, she's too stupid even to work here, even with the Times' pathetically low standards. For decades, there's been this maniacal psychopathic push by the right wing, funded by wealthy and high-powered white supremacist ideologues, to rewrite the history of the last 500 years. They've told all manner of ridiculous lies, such as the founders of the United States were slave owners, but they wrote into the Constitution the means to end slavery. Slavery wasn't ended by a law, it was ended by the Civil War. What part of the Constitution authorizes that? Slavery wasn't stopped by a piece of legislation. The Emancipation Proclamation was passed in 1863, but you still had black people being held in slavery even after the Civil War was over. And they would have remained that way had the South won the war. The Constitution was irrelevant to ending slavery. It was only ended by bloodshed, muskets, and cannon fire. Now, where did Thomas Jefferson, Madison, or any of the other founding slave owners ever authorize that? What part of the Constitution allows for that? At no point did the insurrectionists in the South say, hey, Abe wrote that emancipation thing, so I guess we gotta let the black folks go. We must respect the Constitution after all. No, they said that they don't respect the Constitution or any law other than their own. And this refusal to follow the Constitution has endured ever since, which Weiss and her racist cohorts also never address. The struggle of black people has been to get white society to respect the law, and the response has always been the law is whatever we say it is. And as for that talking point that they wrote into the Constitution, the means to end slavery, there's a flip side to that coin that these patriotic racists never talk about. The founders of the U.S. also wrote into the Constitution the means to perpetuate slavery. And when you look at what happened up until the Civil War, you see that's the only thing that was happening. Dred Scott, the Missouri Compromise, the Fugitive Slave Act, these were legislative and judicial actions based on the Constitution, and all of them reinforced slavery. Nothing weakened it. Before the Civil War, absolutely nothing that would free black people or empower them was passed into law. And after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, nothing was written that would help black people for another 100 years. Though there were plenty of laws and judicial rulings handed down to harm black people before and after slavery, to eliminate what few rights we were supposed to have. This is the white right being silently aided by the white left, who are attempting to rehabilitate the image of the founding slave owners. And they're not just doing it for purposes of ego. They want to rehabilitate their anti-black value system as well. In order to stop the changes black people are threatening to bring about, you can't just give a little resistance. The white supremacists and their rhetoricians like Barry Weiss fully understand what they have to do at this point is roll the clock back to 1860. This is about getting society to resume an antebellum slavery mindset. So they must be bold with the lies, deny the country was founded on slavery, deny the founders were racist, deny that white people benefited from institutional racism, lie big and lie all the time. And you'll even have some alleged white leftists who will gladly join you. It's no accident that trash like Bill Maher are mobbed up with the alt-right. He has no problem with having a few black flunkies smoke weed with him and gutter sex with some hood rats. But when you begin talking about the distribution of power in the society, he made it clear he's on team white supremacy. There's a lot of these white supremacists who have benefited from institutional racism, and they know it. So when you threaten it, they put aside the phony rhetoric and show what they really think. That's what Barry Weiss's little propaganda piece was meant to say. It's meant to say, hey, white left, it's time to get on code. We got to get on code, y'all. So that's the reason why you see Barry Weiss and Bill Maher as best buds hanging out together. Bill Maher spent years whining about cancel culture, microaggressions, political correctness, and radical Islam. But who was it who tried to overthrow the country on January 6th? Was it the college kids who didn't like his crappy comedy skits? Was it black people who were too sensitive about racist comments? Was it radical Muslims who tried to overthrow the country on January 6th? Or was it financially well-to-do white middle-aged males, like Bill Maher? Barry Weiss draws from the same well because they're both on the same side. They have some minor, very minor, rhetorical variants on some minor issues, but when you start talking about black people and especially saying that there should be consequences for practicing anti-black racism, all of a sudden the left-right divide disappears. Race trumps whatever supposed political ideological differences they claim to have. So for those of you who may have wondered, that's who and what Bari Weiss is. She's just another mouthpiece for white supremacy, and not a very good one. Her talking points are demonstrably false, and the only way you'll agree with her is if you already do. That means you have to totally ignore the facts, the historical record, to buy into her line of crap. She's a proponent of alternative facts, what old-fashioned folks like me used to call lies. She ignores history no matter how well documented. She glosses over atrocities whether they happened 200 years ago or 2 minutes ago. She cherry-picks obscure examples that adhere to her narrative and ignores the mountain of evidence that doesn't. She's an apologist for white supremacy who tries to mask her vile bigotry as being nothing more than concern for civic institutions. But no institution, much less a nation, sprouts out of the ground fully formed. It is the result of people and what they do. I did a video about the part that Harvard University played in chattel slavery, but you'll notice that Weiss leaves that out of her rantings. She demands that we simultaneously revere and cherish the past, while at the same time telling us to disregard the parts of it that don't fit her narrative, which is, not surprisingly, most of it. But the only parts of the past that she's interested in cherishing are the parts that celebrate slavery and anti-black racism. The racists are not merely demanding that no one criticize their heroes, they're demanding that slave-owning rapists who carried out genocides be regarded as heroes. Now, these same right-wing snowflakes lose their minds simply because someone says something they don't like. Nobody has put up any statues of anyone they don't approve of. No one's done anything against them, yet they scream that people disagree with them and argue with them. How terrible! If only we had free speech in this country. That way, whenever you say something racist, stupid, or ignorant, nobody would be allowed to challenge you or to say that you're wrong. Yeah, now that would be Barry Weiss's idea of free speech. And like most white supremacists, Bari Weiss routinely uses the clumsy attempt to try to hide behind some black person. She gives a couple of quotes from Frederick Douglass, which are completely and thoroughly out of context. I've got his autobiography, by the way, so I can speak on that. And she doesn't have the self-awareness to realize that people see through her cheap rhetorical ploy. Quoting a black person is the white supremacist rhetorical equivalent of saying, "I have a black friend." When you know your argument is racist, you can't just let it stand on its own. You have to take the words of a dead man who's not here to challenge you on misusing his words, and then twist his words to support the very racism that he dedicated his life to fighting. Like what you see the right wing trying to do with Dr. King all the time. The only audience that this tactic appeals to are the mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging, inbred, low IQ denizens of right-wing hate radio. But for everyone else with an IQ higher than their shoe size, Bari Weiss is clearly seen for the clown she is. She's looking for a job working for some white supremacist think tank, and she's auditioning hard for that job. People who are trying to take refuge inside a parallel reality, and they're attempting to furnish that dream world with self-aggrandizing lies spun by paid liars like Chris Rufo and Bari Weiss. These white supremacist liars put on a phony moderate front and claim that free speech requires we stand up for speech we don't agree with. And then these same people say that critical race theory should be banned and that anyone who calls them racist or white supremacist should be sued because they disagree with those ideas. Only under white supremacy can rich racist mouthpieces like Bari Weiss complain that they're being censored, while they spent years writing for arguably the most prestigious publication on the planet, and now writes pieces for the New York Post, and she also has written some books too. That makes her the first person in human history to have written more books than she's read. For someone who's been censored and driven from the public square, she sure seems to be everywhere, which is the whole point. This is the new white supremacist mantra: try to maintain their supremacy by denying their supremacy exists. Same as the slave owners tried to claim they were the ones being oppressed because the Union government threatened to make the bastards actually work for a living. Bari Weiss and the white media racism she promotes makes sense, but only if you don't have any sense to begin with. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Keitha Dixon, Jean Floreval, Eddie Newsom, Williams Birmingham, and Daniel Davis. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.